Revelation.
This is all a conspiracy. No, you know that is a conspiracy.
Hey everybody, welcome. It is July 1st. Welcome to the podcast. It is Monday, so it's time for the Sunday review of the mainstream media. We're going to start with a debate briefly. Well, we're going to start with a debate briefly. CBS Face the Nation polling is abysmal for Biden. Watch the margin of error, add that to Trump, and in some cases it's almost 7 points, which is a little bit out of control. Also, CBS Sunday Morning Propaganda, where CIA asset Rob Costa says Biden won't step down. But he doesn't mention the mental acuity, not once, nor does Maggie Brennan. And then I'm going to tear into the Sunday New York Times, showing how the newspaper continually mischaracterizes the facts to mislead the public. So we're going to start off first, I think, with CBS Sunday Morning. CBS Sunday Morning here with their with Rob Costa, excuse me, and their report there on Biden, whether or not he's going to drop out of the race. What they don't talk about, unfortunately, though, is his mental acuity, and no one seems to care about that. I think they mention it just a bit in the end and say, they talk about his age and say, it's an asset, not an obstacle kind of thing. So let's go to CBS Sunday Morning and Bob Costa.
Seems to be the theme of the morning.
Everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
For Democrats, Thursday night's debate was a nightmare.
I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
President Joe Biden's performance at the Atlanta face-off, viewed by more than 50 million, sparked a panic, with a flurry of editorials and commentators pleading with 81-year-old Biden to drop out.
It's kind of a DEFCON 1 moment.
I do think people feel like that we are confronting a crisis.
We're still far from our convention, and there is time for this party to figure out a different way forward if he will allow us to do that. It's not just panic, it's pain of what we saw tonight.
Calls for Biden to step aside will likely only strengthen the First Family's resolve for him to stay in. Many Democrats and pundits counted him out in 2020. This past week made clear that winning a rematch will be no easy feat. Trump is on the march in the polls. Think Biden will be replaced at the Democratic convention this August in Chicago? Think again. Biden already has won almost all of the roughly 4,000 pledged delegates. Unless he withdraws, they are expected to vote for him on the first ballot.
What's the reality? Is anybody credible making moves behind the scenes?
For a while, you could make the argument that, it was tough defending Donald Trump as a Republican, that we were going to get behind him. But today, it's a much harder thing for Democrats to explain why they would stick to Joe Biden.
New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu supported Nikki Haley in the Republican primary.
She's genuine, she's likable.
But has since endorsed Trump. Trump has his critics and his challenges, including a sentencing date in July for his criminal conviction in New York. But Sununu says the party is largely with him. And after this past week's debate, they are feeling better than ever.
So you don't see any Democrat trying to make a play against Biden?
No, No one, no, if they're smart, I think they're going to have that kind of realization that as much as they want a new candidate, they had their shot, they missed it, they got to ride it out, hope that there's a second debate, hope that he does much better.
When you get knocked down, you...
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
The last campaign of his long career.
The age is not an obstacle.
Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. I agree.
Yeah, there you go. The funny thing is they didn't even interview like a real Republican, like a MAGA Republican or anybody that might be on Trump's side in this, that is going to benefit from Biden's terrible debate performance. They go to a never Trumper. Well, now he endorses Trumper, Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, who supported Haley. It was obviously a contrived piece by the CIA using their most famous asset or even agent, Rob Costa. And they didn't really mention what was going on there whatsoever. It was kind of a sad state of affairs. So we're going to go now to a short piece showing the polls from CBS News about what happened to Biden in the poll numbers, and they did poll specifically about whether he should drop out of the race or not. But pay attention to the margin of error, which at some point is approaching 7 points. And what's 7 points? You add that in, because that's how they skew polls with the margin of error. They add that in, and then you look at it, it's even more, either Trump, it's either more benefiting Trump or it's more against Biden. So let's look briefly at this poll from CBS Face the Nation.
I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, Democrats defend President Biden after a disastrous debate. And a new CBS poll reveals whether it changed the way voters see the candidates now. The results are not encouraging for the president. The number of voters who say President Biden has the cognitive ability to serve has dropped from 35% earlier this month to 27% after the debate. That's the lowest number since CBS began asking voters that question last September. Nearly 3/4 of all registered voters now say he shouldn't be running. And nearly half of Democrats say he shouldn't remain the nominee, an extraordinary number for an incumbent who didn't face a competitive primary.
Ha, 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 ha.
Voters give former President Trump a significant edge, though, when asked which candidate explained his ideas clearly, inspired confidence, and appeared presidential. President Biden's team sought out Thursday's debate to draw a contrast with Donald Trump and hoped it would soothe concerns about the incumbent's age and stamina. Instead, after a meandering, frequently hard-to-follow performance, not even Mr. Biden's closest supporters could ignore the obvious, as critics outside some of those events and the nation's leading newspapers called for him to step aside. Mr. Biden said he's staying in the race, but some voters are voicing doubt.
I'm not so sure he's as sharp as he should be.
After what happened last night, Democrats should wake up today with a plan B.
We had a big victory against a man that really is looking to destroy our country.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Details of the election rigging are beginning to emerge from all around the country.
But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that.
Manipulated by lies, silenced by taboos.
It's all a sham.
They cheat. They cheat.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. You see the polls absolutely saying that Biden, it all addresses, the polls actually address Biden's mental acuity and his mental faculty. But the big picture here is the fact that people are going to start understanding that, oh, the people on the right, the conservatives, for some time now have been talking about that Biden's frail mental capacity is something to be considered going into this election. It's not a cheap fake. It was never a cheap fake. And now that's writ large, given his debate performance. Of course, the question always is, was this purposeful? Did they push Biden out there with no teleprompter and no notes, knowing he was going to fail? Why did they schedule the debate so early? It seems like they had an idea either he was going to fail or they meant him to fail to possibly get somebody else in there, or who knows, to get the ball rolling for a possible replacement. It's hard to say. But if you look at that report, it definitely states that the Biden family and Joe Biden are digging their heels in. They don't want to be removed from power. That's the problem when you have political power. You don't give it up that easily, especially with the Biden family. It's their family business. How can you sell influence if you're not in a position to influence anything politically? So that's the problem. Before I get tear into the Sunday New York Times here, I just want to encourage people to please engage the channel. Give me a like, give me a couple thumbs up if you can. Leave a comment, share the podcast, like the podcast, subscribe, etc., all that stuff. Also, visit my other website, libpop.org, learn about libertarian populism. And to continue on here, we're going to get into the Sunday New York Times. The most important article here is the one I'm going to put up front. And the problem with this article here online, of course, was this is not the headline that was in the newspaper. The actual headline was in the newspaper was "The days of denial are over for president's campaign after unsteady debate." And now what we have for the headline in the online is the White House brushed off questions about Biden's age. Then the debate happened. And as I previously said, the original headline was "Days of denial are over." Well, no one was denying the president's age. What people were denying on the left and the Democratic Party and even in the administration, calling it cheap fakes. And this is the Biden administration, so you can't 25th Amendment him because the administration would have to do it, the people within the administration. But they said the original headline in the newspaper was denial. Well, nobody was denying his age. They were denying his loss of mental acuity. Now, online, they're saying, oh, the White House brushed off questions about Biden's age. Then the debate happened. The subhead here is President Biden's allies can no longer wave away concerns about his capacity after his unsteady performance on Thursday debate as worries among Democrats grow. So they did put it in the subhead there, talking about his capacity. And that's what the denial was about, his capacity. It wasn't about his age after his unsteady performance. And if you look how the Biden administration and some on the left, including some in the news media and some in the Democratic Party, are brushing it off and just saying, oh, he had a bad day. If you watch some of the other interviews from Face the Nation, you had Wes Moore from he's the governor of Delaware, who brushed it off as well and said that Biden just had a bad night. You know, people have bad nights. Even though he prepared all week and he was well rested and they juiced him up with Adderall, he just had a bad night. He didn't have a bad night. The fact is he was out there without a lifeline, no teleprompter, no notes. Nobody, although a lot of people said he did have an earpiece in, but at a certain point, I think they just stopped talking to him, particularly after his opening remarks. So let's zip through the Sunday New York Times here, where at first they go off here. This story was actually buried, but let's look into this story here. by Peter Baker. Ever since President Biden announced last year that he would run again, those in his inner circle closed ranks and brushed off the obvious question. No, they insisted he was not too old to seek re-election. Was he mentally infirm, though? Who knows? The story goes on to say the news media, they said, was unfairly fixated on his age. Republicans were posting wildly distorted video clips on social media, making him look more feeble than he actually is. Or were they? That's the point that's the point I want to address here. Is having some technical problems as usual. Is that he said the Republicans were posting on social media clips that making him look more feeble than he actually is. That's not true. Those things were accurate. They weren't cheap fakes. And this guy goes on to say, hand-wringing Democrats fretting over the prospect of an octogenarian president turning 86 by the end of his second term were just bedwetters. The story also goes on to say, then the debate happened, and now the days of denial at the White House are over. No longer can the president's confidants simply wave away concerns about his capacity, after his unsteady performance at Thursday night's showdown with former President Donald Trump. Capacity. It's not octogenarian. It's not about age. I know a lot of spry 90-year-olds and even people who are quite with it in their, over 100. It's not about his age. It's about his capacity. He can't walk. His gait is obviously very telling about his psychological capacity. And then the performance during the debate where he's without lifelines, as I said. You saw him after that, if he can be led around by Jill, and then he could read a teleprompter. He could still read a You shoot him up with Adderall, he can read a teleprompter. He actually yells it out, but that is the nature. And then we're going to go on to that's the nature of what Biden is. He can read notes, and he can function as long as he has something to rely on. He has a staff there to direct him where to go. He has notes and things to read. He could certainly read them, but a lot of times he will read direction, stage direction, etc. 4 more years, pause. So, going on to the next story here. Okay, hold on for me here, please. Let's see what we got. Yeah. All right, moving on to the next story. The road to a crisis, how Democrats let Biden glide to renomination. 81-year-old candidate had no plan B. How did we get here? And leading Democrats ask. The answer is complicated. And you might have heard McCaskill saying the same thing. Ex-Senator Claire McCaskill. Barely 7 weeks before Democrats gather in Chicago to formally nominate Mr. Biden for a second term, the Democratic Party is in crisis. Many party leaders, donors, activists, and ordinary voters, stunned by the president's faltering debate appearance, now fear he will lose to the former President Donald J. Trump and drag Democrats to devastating defeats in congressional and state elections. We can only hope. I'm sorry, I'm trying to toggle here between scenes, and I have to switch both back and forth to apps, when usually I didn't have to do that. It would work in the background. And then we're going to move, in light of that last article, where everybody's questioning what to do now because the apparent was not apparent to them. Just like all Democrats and the blue Kool-Aid drinkers having their head in the sand day after day and month after month and year after year about not only bad policies, which was acute, and very apparent, but Biden being able to run the country. He's not really running the country, and most people know that, or they don't know that. But now it is apparent that Joe Biden does not have the mental capacity to be president of the United States. So let's move on to the next article, which is major Democratic donors ask themselves what to do about Biden. Some floated intervention, and that's in the subhead. Some floated intervention. What does that mean? What type of intervention are they talking about? Oh, changing the ticket. Well, how do they do that? How do they sidestep Kamala Harris? Or are they talking as other types of intervention? You don't know what type of intervention the rich oligarchs are even talking about. Who knows what they're talking about? Sorry, it's timely. The story goes on to say there were discussions with political advisors about arcane rules under which Mr. Biden might be removed from the ticket against his will. How would that happen? And replaced at or before the Democratic National Convention, according to a person familiar with the effort. Terrible reporting. You need to quote somebody there. In Silicon Valley, a group of mega donors, including Ron Conway and Lauren Powell Jobs, were calling, texting, and emailing one another about the situation they described as a possible catastrophe. The donors wondered about whom in the Biden fold they could contact to reach Jill Biden, the First Lady, who in turn could persuade her husband not to run, according to persons familiar with the matter might have said. Jill Biden is the one who's digging in her heels here. So Joe Biden doesn't even know what planet he's on. So if the reason they want to get in contact with Jill Biden is not to convince Joe Biden, is just to tell Joe Biden, Joe, we're not going to the Oval Office today. We're going to get ice cream, and we're not going to go back to the Oval Office ever. And we're just going to move into some more political news here to get off the debate, because we've kind of beaten this dead horse. We've beaten Medicare to death, and we've beaten this dead horse enough. Let the Democrats try to sort it out. But one question I do have is, why aren't prominent Republicans out on the warpath after this? I don't see pressers by every sitting member of Congress, Republican sitting member of Congress, and senators. Obviously, you're not going to see Mitch McConnell. He's in the same boat. But having press conference saying, now it is apparent to everyone Joe Biden needs to be removed from office immediately. Who cares if he runs again? Because they want to leave him in because they think they could beat Joe Biden? Whatever. For the sake of the country, he needs to be removed, because it's a long time before January. He could do a lot of damage before then, and I'm surely he will, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, more news. Killing of Texas girl becomes a new immigration flashpoint. The killing of a 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungare in Houston has become the latest crime seized on by Republicans to attack President Biden over his immigration policy. Going on with the story, if I can. I just want to make one point, and that's it's not immigration policy. It is allowing illegal immigration. They talk about it as asylum seekers, as newcomers. They have all these euphemisms. All they're doing is allowing illegal immigration. When you allow illegal immigration, you don't properly vet the people coming in, and this is what you get. You get criminals. Sure, there's some asylum seekers, but mostly criminals and economic migrants, people fleeing bad economic conditions. But with them, particularly from Venezuela, what Venezuela did, and what China, I'm sure, is doing too, a lot of other countries are doing, is opening their prisons and saying you have to leave the country, go to America. And so you get terrorists, you get criminals, you get people with mental problems, or both, or all three of the above. So I'm going to go on now to the rest of this story here. If you weren't familiar with what happened, the killing of a 12-year-old Houston girl found last week in a shallow water of a city drainage ditch after being strangled and most likely raped was a horrific crime. It doesn't get any worse, says the city's mayor. Then investigators arrested 2 recent Venezuelan migrants, not illegal immigrants, not illegal aliens, Venezuelan migrants and charged them with killing the girl. Suddenly, the killing, which had ripped apart a Houston family, became the latest flashpoint in the debate over immigration. It is a flashpoint in the sense that it's not even a flashpoint. Let's just be real here. It's the bipartisan Senate bill was an effort for the establishment to legalize illegal immigration and what they're calling asylum seekers. And is it a flashpoint? I don't know if it's a flashpoint. It is what happens when you allow illegal immigration to go unchecked, particularly when you deal with numbers as high as thousands per day. So this is what you're getting. Not only that, but you're sending a clear signal for people to come, and you're sending a clear signal for governments to send their worst. And this has happened before. If you remember when they opened up asylum for Cuban immigrants, what happened was a Cuban boat lift when Fidel Castro basically opened up his prisons and sent all his criminals. If you ever saw the movie Scarface, that's basically what it was about. More headlines. Supreme Court ruling reflects challenges of January 6 prosecutions and the finding that prosecutors misused an obstruction law. The prosecutors misused an obstruction law. The prosecutors misused an obstruction law. The prosecutors misused an obstruction law. I just want that to sink in. To charge rioters, not insurrectionists. For justice has highlighted the lack of established legal blueprint, a precedent for addressing an attack on the foundations of democracy. So they had to put that in there after they said misused, go back there, misused an obstruction law, misused an obstruction law, misused an obstruction law, but they were addressing an attack on the foundations of democracy. Sure, bullshit. The Supreme Court decision on Friday that prosecutors had misused an obstruction law, and charging hundreds of rioters who, not insurrectionists, rioters, who attacked the Capitol in the latest example of the persistent challenges the Department of Justice has faced in grappling with consequences of January 6th. Initially designed as a hedge against corporate malfeasance, the obstruction law was never an easy fit for addressing the chaos that erupted at the Capitol. And almost from the start, defense lawyers complained that the government had stretched the statute far beyond its meaning, accusing prosecutors of using it mostly because it carried a stiff maximum penalty of 20 years. The Supreme Court largely agreed with all of this, narrowing the scope of the law and ruling that it could be used only in cases hewing more closely to its original intent, where documents have been tampered with or where other forms of evidence have been damaged or impaired. Moving on to the next article. Is New York prepared for the bird flu pandemic? It's coming. A healthcare system has stockpiles of medicines and has worked out a lot of the kinks since the COVID pandemic, but experts still have some concern about a bird flu outbreak. Reading from the story, the bird flu virus, H5N1, stay with me now, is not spreading among people, but the city is already preparing as if it could. It is considering plans to set up isolation and quarantine hotels. One New York City hospital system is taking steps to start testing its sewage for the virus, so it will know if bird flu is silently circulating among patients and staff. I just have to say is that even if it's in regards to the last story, that there is a misuse, not just of law, but of everything. It's called authoritarianism. It's the persecution using prosecution. It's authoritarianism using the power of the government and stretching legal proceeding beyond its use. And if you look at this new story here about the bird flu, and that we already know about gain-of-function research, which bird flu is in there, because if you understand what the moratorium was back in 2012 and 2013 about the moratoriums called by the scientists themselves using CRISPR, it was becoming too easy to create virulent and deadly strains of viruses. And which was the virus they were working on? H1N1 at the time, now it's H5N1, the avian flu virus. So this is on the shelf. They're taking it off the shelf. As we speak, they're dusting it off and they're preparing to create plans that build on what they did during COVID. What they did beyond COVID. Setting up isolation and quarantine hotels. Worked out a lot of the kinks since the COVID pandemic. So they're working out the kinks of the authoritarianism they used before. So it's authoritarianism is in fact what we're fighting on each issue. That's why I'm a libertarian. I'm opposed to authoritarianism. The story goes on to say there's still a huge amount of uncertainty about when it will be jumped to human transmission. His guess, maybe months, maybe years, maybe right before, probably right after the convention. Maybe months, maybe months, maybe months, maybe months. When will it jump to human transmission? People don't understand what's happening here. All they have to do is take it's called a humanized virus. They take a virus that hasn't been humanized, they let it spread around livestock and farm animals. Then they introduce a humanized version of the H5N1 and said it jumped. You know, they don't show how it jumped, but it jumped. And then there you go, we're off to the races again. All right, quickly, I want to go to this story quickly here. Rare white buffalo calf arrives in Yellowstone with a message. The calf named Wakingili is said to fulfill a Lakota prophecy that brings hope, but its birth is also a sign that more must be done to protect the earth. What does it say actually? For the Lakota people, the birth of the calf earlier this month fulfills a prophecy and it is a sacred symbol, but its warning is that a spiritual awakening must happen. The name of the calf, Wakingli, means come holy, returns sacred. So it's a spiritual awakening that doesn't have anything to do with a sign to protect the earth, but what it does mean is a spiritual awakening, and in that sense, it will, a matter of factly, protect the earth, because those of us who are awake, and I don't mean woke, but I mean awake to what's happening in the world, this is what the Lakotas want, and this is what everybody wants, and this is what a sign of the Great Awakening, whether spiritual, whether it's the fourth or fifth Great Awakening, but also a great political awakening. But also the Mayans referred to this time as a time of the Great Forgetting, or rather the previous time is a time of great forgetting, and now is the time of the awakening. Going back to a few more stories before I hit the editorials here, which is back about the debate. Guess who's back? A Trump ally and Brexiteer disrupts the UK again with his populist anti-immigration campaign. Nigel Farage has once more shaken up British politics. He can finally win a seat in the national parliament. And I'm not going to go into this too much. We all know about Nigel Farage. The establishment are terrified. The conservatives are terrified. Mr. Farage declared gleefully, referring to the governing party, which trails badly in opinion polls ahead of the July 4th election. Britain was a broken nation, he added in a speech attacking targets ranging from asylum seekers, immigrants, to the BBC. And what do we know? What do we know about Nigel Farage? He's allied with Trump because he is a Trump. And why is he a Trumpist? Because he's an economic nationalist. That's why he was the one spearheading Brexit. Because the point is, as a nation state, you want to keep your sovereignty. if you give up your sovereignties to a supranational organization, whether it's the WHO, the UN, or the European Union, then those supranational organizations can open up your borders and flood you with immigrants to the detriment of citizens already living here and to the economy, mind you. This is just taking time to switch back and forth. Hold on a second. And then we're going to go to some more European news. With Macron and Biden vulnerable, so is Europe. The U.S. president debate and Sunday snap election in France have emboldened national forces. There you go, the nationalists that could challenge NATO undo defense of Ukraine, which I hope they undo the defense of Ukraine. Not that I don't like the Ukrainian people, but they should sue for peace. The United States and France face nationalist forces that could undo those international commitments and pitch the world into uncharted territory. The wobbling, wavering debate performance spread panic among Democrats and raised doubts of whether it should even be on the ticket. Uncertainty is a new high in the United States, as well as in a shaken and startled France. I know you can't see that. The end of that. Yeah, the fact is the left is on the run everywhere around the world. Why? Because their agenda has become writ large and people don't want it. People don't want their nation states flooded with immigrants that don't assimilate. And I could go into a whole thing about immigration. I won't here. But the point being is it's undermining the sovereignty of the nation state, which they want to do, the globalist forces want to do. It's part of the globalist agenda, but the nation state has been a good thing since the fall of the monarchies and kingdoms. They built a Republican, for the most part, Republican or Democratic nation state. And so obviously, if you live in a certain geographical area, the nation state, you want to be able to govern that geographical area to the benefit of you and your fellow citizens. That's just the way it works politically. It always has. All right, got to go back and forth here. Excuse me. A string of Supreme Court decisions hit hard at environmental rules. I should have put the Supreme Court decisions together, but 4 cases backed by conservative activists in years have combined to diminish the power of the EPA. Go through this quickly. Basically, they tried to put it as we're against clean air and clean water. We're not. The point of weakening the EPA is the EPA was pushing regulations, the EPA's authority to limit not pollution in air and water necessarily, because everybody wants that. It's the greenhouse gases that are supposedly heating up the planet. EPA regulations have driven up costs for industries ranging from electric utilities to home building. In the 2020 challenge, the EPA climate proposal known as the Clean Power Plan, the court sharply limited the agency's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from power plants, even though that rule had not even taken effect, because there's no evidence that say that greenhouse gas or carbon dioxide, most specifically, is heating up the planet. Although there is carbon change, you can't. That's a jump from one thing to the another. It's actually a theory that carbon dioxide pollution. President Biden has pledged the United States will cut its carbon dioxide pollution in half by 2030 and eliminate it by 2050. How do you do that? Carbon dioxide is a naturally occurring gas, which scientists say all major economies must do, except for China and India, to avoid the most deadly and costly impacts of climate change. The year the EPA has rushed to finalize new rules and slash pollutions from cars, trucks, power plants, and methane leaks from cow farts. No, you see what it reads on there. It says methane leaks from oil and gas wells, whatever. They're out of control. If he wins a second term, Biden wants to cut emissions from steel, cement, and other heavy industries that have never been required to reduce planet warming emissions. Like I said, that is a theory. And then we're going to go on just briefly into the last 2 opinion pieces that have to do with the debate. The one is from the editorial board, which states, to serve his country, President Biden should leave the race. And they go on to say, Thursday's debate, the president needed to convince the American public that he was equal to the formidable demands of the office he is seeking to hold for another terms. Ignore what is plain to see, that Biden is not the man he was 4 years ago. The president appeared, he was even feeble 4 years ago, but he was campaigning from his basement so nobody saw. The president appeared on Thursday night as a shadow as great public servant. He was never a great public servant. He struggled to explain what he would accomplish this second term, struggled to respond to Trump's provocations, struggled to hold Trump accountable for his lies and his failures and chilling plans. More than once, he struggled to make it to the end of a sentence. Should be remembered that Biden administration challenged Trump to the verbal duel. He set the rules and insisted on date earlier than any other previous election debate. He understood that he needed to address long-standing public concerns about his mental acuity. The truth Mr. Biden needs to confront now is that he failed at his own test. That's what we talk about, is how the fact is that it seems like a setup because they called for this. So was it a test? Was it a test by Democrats to see if he could, or was he set up to fail on purpose? I think he was set up to fail on purpose. That's why they had this early debate, so they could get in another. Who knows how they're going to accomplish this? It's really uncharted territory, and it's very, 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 very strange. Okay, the last final opinion piece, an article from the New York Times, is Joe Biden is a good man and good president. He must bow out of the race, by Thomas Friedman, who's actually a friend of Biden. And let's go on with the article. I watched the Biden-Trump debate alone in the Lisbon hotel room. We don't care where you were, Tom Friedman. And it made me weep. He's a crybaby. I cannot remember a more heartbreaking moment in American presidential campaign politics in my lifetime, precisely because it revealed Joe Biden has no business running for re-election. We are at the dawn, and this is the point, we're at the dawn of artificial intelligence revolution that is going to change everything for everyone. How we work, how we learn, how we teach, how we trade, how we invent, how we collaborate, how we fight wars, how we commit crimes, and how we fight crimes. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear the phrase artificial intelligence mentioned by either man during the debate. That is indeed the case. I know how serious artificial intelligence is, and I just put that in there to make everybody aware of the seriousness of where we are in history and the cusp. And maybe that's why they wanted Joe Biden in there. They needed somebody they could certainly push around, wave the flag of climate change and to scare everybody into voting for an establishment person who was going to do the bidding of the oligarchs, the corporate paymasters, etc., the people that are actually running the world. But that was Thomas Friedman, a friend of Joe Biden, who even doesn't want him to run. But most people are talking about the fact that there's no way that they're going to be able to swap him out. Alex Jones floated a possibility that they're going to assassinate Joe Biden and blame it on a Trump supporter, or assassinate both him and Kamala Harris. My point being is, if he's not 25th Amendment, if he doesn't step down, they're going to maybe get him off the ticket. They'll give the presidency to Kamala Harris. She can be the first woman president for 3 months and then replace the entire ticket. And she will agree to that as long as she can be the first woman president and go down the history books as such. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, help engage the channel. That helps the channel all the way around. And the more views we get, the bigger we get, the more chance we have together, but particularly me, have a chance to inform people of what really is going on, that we can read between the lines of the mainstream media and see what's happening, and not have our head in the stands like the blue Kool-Aid drinking Democrats who don't even, like Joe Biden, don't even know where they are. what planet they're on and where they are in history. And that's why it's so important to elect Donald Trump, because we need to preserve the individual liberties guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution, not just for citizens of the United States, but everybody worldwide. Is a dream of libertarian populists like myself. That's why Trump needs to be elected, because in the coming global authoritarian state, which is being built by the corporations and the oligarchs, if we can head this off, if we can maintain the United States sovereignty and keep pushing for freedoms, we can stop this, and we can stop people's individual freedoms by being eviscerated everywhere, but particularly in the United States. We can maintain the nation's sovereignty and fight back against global authoritarianism and this new world order. All right, thanks for joining me today. Again, don't forget, and remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically. Stay hip to the trick. Respect. I'll see you tomorrow.
Rudy's Revelation.
You can't handle the truth.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
The New World Order. The New World Order